So welcome to episode 3 of programming a text adventure game using 3 languages. So we're going to actually start doing some code today. Now at the moment I'm using just Notepad++, which is the text editor, and of course we are legally obliged to print hello world in any new programming language. I'm sure most of you will have done Python, and so this is the hello world, but this is probably looking slightly different to what you may have already done or that you expected to see. Reason being that I've already defined a function and put the print, as you'd expect, in there, and then a main here. So what on earth is going on here? Now this is the way I teach right from the beginning, even at primary school. I do not mess about with trying to do it in stages, get straight into it. And this is the way I explain it. Python is an interpreted language. That means that when you run it, it will look at your script and it will go through it line by line and then carry out the instructions. When it sees the word def, it knows that that means define a function or a procedure. Now I'm not going to distinguish between functions and procedures. I will probably use them interchangeably depending on what I feel like saying at the time, but we all know that they are different. This is a procedure because it doesn't return a value and it doesn't have anything in the brackets here, but I will still probably call this a function. Just have to live with that. That's me. So we've now got we've defined a main function here, and inside it we've got print Python hello world. The way the interpreter works is that when it sees the word def, it ignores it. It says, okay, I've got this function, I might be asked to use it later, but for the time being I'm not doing anything. And it goes down the list. I can't do that because it's part of the main function. Python has this horrible way of defining the end of a function by just having this sort of spaces in after the definition, and then when the spaces end, that's the end of that function. It's a horrible way of doing things, but that's what Python's like. So this comment here just says that the program starts here. That is against the margin, so it means that that function is finished. It finished here. Then it reads this one and says, oh, main, okay, I've got something to do here. I can now run the main function. So it will jump back up to here. Yep, there's main. Is there anything for me to eat? Nope, there's no biscuit in there. And then I'll just carry out and do what I'm told to do here, and then I'll jump back to where I start from, and that's the program finished. I'll just show you that I can run this directly from within Notepad++ because I've already set it up to do that. So I'll run that with Python, and as you'd expect, you just get the Python exe here, hello world, and that's the end of the program. Job done. So we'll close that one. So I'm hoping that those of you who have done Python before will understand why I'm doing it this way right from the start. Is because we are studying, remember, 3 languages. Let me just show you the same thing in Lua. So this is Lua. I'll just increase the font of that one a little bit if I can. That's better. So again, we've got the same procedure. We've got a function main, print Lua, hello Lua, and end. So you'll see immediately that we've got this print thing as we had in Python, which is pretty much the same. This time, instead of having the word def, we've got the word function, which is far more sensible. Okay, again, this is not a function, it's a procedure, but Lua only has the word keyword function, and everything is, whether it's a real function or whether it's a procedure, is still started off with the word function. But the nice thing is it has an end statement here, so it tells you immediately that my function main starts here. If you want to feed it a biscuit, you can do, and then the reference to biscuits is that I like to think of functions and procedures as like little pets that carry out certain things for you, and in order to get them to do things, sometimes you have to give them a biscuit. Those of you laughing and thinking, what on earth is he on about? Don't worry, there is probably about 10% of you watching who are not neurotypical and will understand that concept fully. But so we've now got function main, print hello world, and again, because this Lua is an interpreted language, it will ignore this, put it in memory somewhere, and then it will call main and jump to it and then print hello world here. So let me just run that in Lua. There we go. Now this is, let me just see if my dog wants to get out. I'll be back in a second. Fun of working at home. Right, so we've got the hello world here, just as you would expect to see. So this is running it from the command prompt, which is the way you can get Notepad++ to do your stuff for you. So no big surprises there. But this, for those of you who are studying computer science at the moment, does look really like pseudocode. You've got a function. So it tells the user you're defining a function, and it's got this lovely little end statement. So I really like Lua. It's sensible. You know exactly where everything starts and ends. Right, so we've done Lua, and finally, of course, C#. Now, you might be expecting me to now fire up a Visual Studio, which indeed I could do, but you can, if you're clever, use a script and run it from a little program called Script CS. If you look that up on the net, you'll find very little about it. There are a couple of YouTube videos showing you how to use it. You have to install it using the command line, but it does work perfectly for small, simple things of testing things out and running them. So what's the difference here? Well, you'll see we've got the main down here, as we did in our Lua one and as we did in our Python one. The only slight difference here is that this one has got a capital letter. That's more a convention rather than a necessity, in that C# likes to call its procedures and functions with a capital letter, so no big deal there. If we were using the IDE, you would not have this here, because when it is compiled, it assumes that it's running from a main function. So that's why I started off by doing, without Python, a main function, and with Lua, just to reflect the slight differences, but the way you can kind of make these things similar. Now, because this is compiled, it doesn't work in quite the same way, but the compiler will again work similar to a interpreter and sort of see, okay, well, I've got this main function here, I know that's where I've got to start, so it would then go straight into this one and start running it. But because we're running it as a script, I need to put this little extra stub in just so that Script CS will actually run it for us. Now, we've got a lot more stuff here than we had on Python and Lua. We've got these keywords here. Don't worry too much about them at the moment, but C# is a strongly typed language, which means that everything you ask it to do, you have to tell it why, where, what. It wants to know everything. So that's the difference here. We'll come back to all these things as and when we need to, but for the moment, just accept that in a C# program, you will need to use these three keywords before the name of your function. Again, you can put stuff inside the brackets and you can return values, but we'll go into that as and when. Now, console.writeline is the C# equivalent of print. So I perhaps, to have kept this standard, I did put print Lua hello world. So let's change that. Let's put this one C# hello world. Oops, got the wrong symbol there. C# hello world to do the same thing. So console writeline is very similar to print, and it has a semicolon at the end of the line to tell you that that line of code is finished. I could actually, if I wanted to, because unlike Python, which screams at you, I can do that, and that will work perfectly well, because the compiler finds the function that is being called and it continues to use it until such time as it sees a semicolon. Then it knows that it's finished that particular line of code. So you don't have to do it. This is just the more human readable way of doing it. Now, the reason I've put these lines here is that normally this would run in a console similar to what we showed on the other two here, and then that would close immediately, because once the program's finished, there's no reason for the console to stay open. So I've put these in ready for that, and what that does is it uses console write, press any key to continue. Now here we have an immediate advantage over Python. Console write line writes that to the screen and then inserts a new line character, and so that will appear, and then it's already sitting, the cursor is already sitting on the next line down, waiting for the next thing it has to write to the console. Console.write puts the text here, but it doesn't drop down to the next line. Console read key, what that does is as soon as you press any key on the keyboard, the moment you press it, that line is finished, and so of course it just shuts off. So let me just run that, and we'll just go through it again there. So first of all, save it because I made a slight alteration, and then we'll run with C#. It takes a second or two for the compiler to do its job, and there we go, C#, hello world, and there's that press any key to continue that I was telling you about, and the cursor, look, is sitting at the end there. So if I now hit the end, well, I don't even need to hit enter key. If I just press a key, there we are, that's finished. Now it's come up with C program files Notepad++, because of course that was where I was running the script from, and it's using the System32 command prompt here. So that wouldn't normally happen if you're running this from an IDE, the whole thing would just disappear. But it just shows you, for teaching purposes, it's nice to be able to, if you're making a comparison, that you can run a C# script directly from Notepad++. So that's the equivalent of hello world, and we'll go now to the next step, which perhaps you would normally find when you are doing your Python, is that we now want to include some input from the user. So again, because I'm trying to emulate and keep the languages as similar as possible, I'm running a main function. Here's the function being defined. Again, we're not giving it any biscuits. This time we're creating a variable name, and then it says the Python input, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Type your name and press enter, which is Python's input function is quite nice because it allows you to put here what you want to appear on the screen, and then after you have typed your name and pressed the enter key, that will be stored in whatever you typed in will be stored in the variable which we've called name, and then Python will print out hello plus name. Now you're now going to be screaming at me and say, yes, but normally would you not do this? Yes, but I want to do this in 3 languages, so I'm doing it this way. So what we're doing is using the plus sign here as a string concatenation. This is a string, hello, and whatever you typed in the keyboard is also a string, and it's simply just going to join them together. Notice that there is a space at the end of hello. So let's run this and see what it does. So run, let me just make sure everything is saved. Run with Python, and here up it comes. Type your name and press enter. I always use Fred because it's just 4 keys that are on the keyboard. Press enter. Hello Fred. Job done. So let's get out of the way and we'll just explain. I'm sure you're already familiar with this, but in case beginners are watching this. So the Python interpreter saw def main, it ignored it until it found main, it ran main, which jumped back to here, and then it created a variable and asked to input type your name, which of course we did by typing in Fred, and then that line's finished. It then printed out hello plus whatever I typed in, which of course was Fred. So no big surprises there, but it's neatly packaged in a little main function or main procedure. As I said, I will use these words without really thinking what they mean. This is not therefore functional programming because we're not using pure functions. I would like to call this non-linear programming. So that's what we'll call it. We're using non-linear programming. We've not got a bunch of stuff all in the margin here and it runs it one line until it gets to the bottom. So there we go. We've got that in Python, fairly standard stuff, and it's just printing out whatever you type in. Let's do the same thing in Lua. Now Lua doesn't have an input function. But you guys, if you've done Python before, will probably be used to having it. So, why don't we write our own? So that's what I've done. So let me just start at the bottom here. As before, we've got a main, we've got a function main, and we've got a variable. And now we've got input. Type your name and press enter. Ooh, nice. So we've got similar to what we had in Python. But of course, input is not a built-in function within Lua. So this is where we've written our own. It shows you how easy it is. So there we are, function input. I've given it the name, and this time we're giving it a couple of biscuits. We're giving it the prompt and an ending. So we're supplying it with two what they call arguments, which are being given to it. That's why I like to call them biscuits when we use the input function here. So we put type your name and press enter. You'll say, but you haven't given it anything else. You've only said type your name and press enter. Now this is where Lua is quite clever. It's expecting two pieces of information to be sent to it, but me, the programmer, hasn't bothered to supply it with a second ending. So what we've got here is that the variable ending here, I'm checking now to see whether anything has been added. So ending is either equal to ending which the user has put in, or if it's not anything in there, it'll give it a default value. And the default value here in this case is an underscore. I'll explain why that once we've run this and show you. And then we're using the instead of the print statement, we're using io.write. Now this is similar to the if I just go quickly back to Hello World CS, we had a console.write, which means that it will write those to the screen, but it won't drop down to the next line on the console. So we've got a similar thing with Lua. It has an io.write here, and then you can join two things together. Instead of using a plus sign, it has these two dots. So two dots is the equivalent of C# and Python's plus sign, which joins two strings together. But it's far more intelligent because this will only join strings. That will become a little more obvious a little further on, but it's nice to have a dedicated string concatenation rather than using plus, which can cause all sorts of grief when you're trying to join strings and numbers, as I'm sure many of you who have done Python will have come across already. So then it returns whatever the user types in. So to get whatever the user types in, it uses io.read. So this is the nearest equivalent to Python's input, is io.read. The downside is that it doesn't allow you to put something in here like type in the prompt that you want to type. So that's why we've made our own function. So let me just show you in action, and then I'll explain it more fully. So we'll run that in Lua. There we go. Type your name and press enter. You'll see that the hyphen or underscore is sitting there as a kind of a little prompt, so you know where to put it. And that, of course, has come from here. I put in type your name and press enter into this line 9 up here. Just to highlight that for you. But I didn't supply it with anything else. So this got passed up to here, the prompt. And then the ending wasn't defined. So this line would have looked and said, okay, ending equals ending, or okay, I've nothing put in there, so we'll give it this default value of the underscore character. Then it's writing out prompt, which of course was this, type your name and press enter, and it added to it the ending, which we've now redefined as a underscore. So if we put that one back on, type your name and press enter is the prompt, and then the underscore character is the ending. And now it's waiting for me to type something in so that it can read what I type in using io.read and return it back to whatever called it, which of course was this line here. So I'm now going to put Fred in and press enter, and it says hello Fred, as you'd expect. So we'll just close that off for a second. So just to go through that again, we called a main function. The main ran this, created a variable, and then ran our new, which we created, function to do input the same as Python, and we supplied it just with type your name and press enter, and I didn't do an ending, so it put that there. So let's say instead of that we wanted the arrow sign. So if I save that and we run it again, run with Lua, there we are. We've now got, after our enter, we've got that kind of arrow key instead of the underscore. Personal preference, you can put what you like in here. So let's type it just to get rid of that. All right. That's all finished. We can close that down. You may or may not know that you can do exactly the same with Python. If I go back to hello user Python, because Python's got its own input, we didn't need to do anything fancy here, but later on I'll show you how we can actually define our own input function in Python, which will allow you to put in whatever you wanted to do here. I've had to hard code that in, so I've had to put that line here because I'm using Python's built-in input function, but we can expand on that later, and that's what this whole series is about, is kind of how you can do things with different languages and kind of emulate them. So we in Lua have emulated the input, and that's exactly what it's doing. Okay, let's move on to the C# version. Again, it's starting to look a little more complicated now. We've got, of course, our main one here, which is only for use in script CS. It's when you do this in an IDE, you would not have this direct call. This will run the main function as before, and again I've created an input function here. So we've got these three keywords which we'll explain later as to why we're using them, and then the name of the function input. Now this time it's got a capital I, simply to keep it in with the convention of anything that you create in C#. If it's a function or a procedure, you would normally give it a capital letter to start with. It will work perfectly without, so I could have done it with a lowercase I. And again, we're feeding it with two biscuits. We've got prompt and the end. Now, the difference here is that we have to supply C# with the variable data type here. So the prompt is what it's expecting to come in as a string, and the same with the end. Now the reason for putting in our defining the function here, string end equals underscore, is similar to what we were doing in Lua, where we were kind of compensating for the fact that the programmer may only give one piece of information. Here it's expecting two, the prompt and the end, but if it's not given, it will automatically default to the underscore there. So that means that we can call this without specifying what the end would be. So if we go back to main, again we are going to define a variable and we have to give it the type. So we're going to call a string variable called name, and then we're going to use our brand new input function, and we're going to supply it with type your name and press enter. It'll then use the console write line, which we've already seen, to add together hello plus whatever name is returned from our function. So let's just quickly go back to the function. How does this work? we're giving it, in this case, we're giving it type your name and press enter, and we're not giving it anything here. So the console write is similar to write line, but without going on to the next line down. It will write out the prompt, which is type your name and press enter, and it will add the default end, which in this case is the underscore there, and then console read line is what gets the information from the keyboard. So you tap in whatever you want to do, hit enter, and that will be picked up by this function and returned here back to whoever called it, which in this case is this line here. This is similar to the Lua. If I just show you here, this one used io.read, and C# uses console.readline. So similar, but obviously slightly different. Let's just run this one to make sure that it works. So we'll run with C#. Takes a moment just to compile it. Here we are, type your name and press enter. So we've got Fred, and enter, hello Fred, and then press any key, and that's the end of the program. So we've already got some pretty complicated stuff here, but I wanted to show you by using the Notepad++ that the differences between the languages are not that great. So Python has its own input function, which is nice, it's quite convenient, but it has some limitations because you have to hard code in any prompt that you want to put in any kind of extra thing. So minor disadvantage. And then you print out the result of your input, which is stored in a variable. The variables are not defined. This is it can be string, it could be a number, it could be Boolean, it could be anything. Python doesn't care. It has what they call dynamic variables. Same with Lua. We've used the same kind of thing, a dynamic variable. You could put what you like in it, and you can change it again afterwards. And the C# is strictly typed. Once you have created a variable and you've defined it as string, if you try putting a number in there, it's going to scream at you and you will get errors. Console write line is the equivalent of the Python's and Lua's print. Console write, there is not a direct equivalent for in Python, though having said that, if I just switch back to user Py, there is something you can extend the print function with. Let's say hello, and then oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong key there, F11. You can add a comma, end equals there. Now what that does in Python is that it will print out the word hello, but the cursor will remain on the same line. So the end equals open or nothing, empty string here will do the same. It'll get rid of the new line character. Just see if I can get back the there we go. So if we can just get back this, I've still lost my margin, but if I was to run that, that would just put in a line. So I've lost the oh, here we go, that's better. So let's run, I'll save it and we'll run this again. So it'll just put this time hello plus name, and it should just demonstrate perhaps that the cursor is remaining here. So if we run that with Python, oops, now this is one of the reasons I hate Python. What we've got here is the usual rubbish you get. Indentation error, unident does not match outer indentation level. Why? This is Python. I hate it for that reason. I have got a perfectly good function here, but it doesn't like the fact that I might have used, for example, a tab here, and I might have used, for example, yes I did, look, 4 spaces here. The sooner they can get rid of this is absolutely ridiculous. So we will now save that. So if you're a Python user and you're screaming at Python, join me. Right, here we are. Let's try that. Run with Python. Oh, it still doesn't like it. Well, there you go. That's one of the fun things of using this. So okay, I just paused the video for a moment while I was sorting this nonsense out, but I finally got it running. So it did seem to be to do with the usual indentation errors. So let's run that again, and we'll run that with Python. There we go, it's actually working now. So type your name and press enter. We'll do Fred, enter, and you can see this time we've got the hello Fred as we did before, but the second hello, instead of having these three arrows telling you that you've finished the program sitting and underneath hello, you've got hello and immediately you've got the three arrows. So that proves that this use of end equals whatever works here. You can actually put something else in here. If we put let's, just for fun of it, let's put an exclamation mark in there. We'll save it. I'll just close off the original version and we'll run that again. Run with Python. I'll put Fred in, and then we've got hello with the exclamation mark. So this can show you how you could, if you wished, build your own custom input with Python that kind of allowed you to use that, similar to what we've done in our Lua version of input and our hello user version of input here using C#. So there's a way you can mess with Python, but I won't go into that at this stage because we're talking about overriding functions and it all gets a bit hairy. So that's for later on. But I hope that was a first good series for you, and next video we'll move on to doing a bit more comparison between the two or three languages before we start really programming our adventure game in full.